The moment a narcissistic person realizes they can cross your boundaries and treat you poorly without facing any real consequences, they begin to see that they have control over the situation. It does not happen because you are powerless or weak. It happens because you may have been trying to communicate with someone who is never following the same rules of respect and understanding. But there are certain powerful phrases that can completely shift the dynamic. They are simple, calm, and emotionally controlled words that show you are no longer available for manipulation. By the end of this, you will understand what to say when someone tries to minimize you, control your choices, or make you question your own worth. Have you ever left a conversation wishing you had responded differently, then replayed that moment over and over in your mind? If so, this is about breaking that cycle. This is not about defeating someone in an argument or proving that you are right. It is about recognizing a pattern and learning how to protect your peace. The biggest advantage a narcissist often has is not their personality, confidence, or ability to influence others. Their real advantage comes from your hesitation. It comes from your need to explain yourself, your hope that if you just find the perfect words, they will finally understand your pain and change their behavior. But many times, they already understand more than you realize. They may recognize your emotions, your concerns, and your needs, but their priority is often maintaining control rather than creating genuine understanding. This is why endless explanations usually do not create change. The stronger approach is not arguing harder. It is creating firm boundaries and standing behind them. One of the most powerful phrases you can use is, "That doesn't work for me." These 4 words may seem simple, but they carry a strong message. They communicate that you are aware of your limits and that you are no longer asking for permission to have them. A narcissistic person often does not immediately respect boundaries. In many cases, they test them first. This is an important thing to understand when dealing with someone who is controlling, self-centered, or emotionally manipulative. Many people believe respect should automatically exist in every relationship, whether it is with a partner, family member, friend, or coworker. But some personalities operate by discovering how much they can get away with before someone finally pushes back. They may test your limits through small actions that appear harmless at first. These tests can show up in many different forms. They might constantly interrupt you when you speak, ignore your opinions, make jokes that embarrass you, invade your personal space, dismiss your feelings, or expect you to give them special treatment. Individually, these moments may seem small, but repeated patterns reveal something deeper. They are often ways of discovering whether you will tolerate being treated without consideration. A person who repeatedly crosses your boundaries is paying attention to your reactions. They are learning whether your words are backed by action or whether they can continue without any real resistance. This is why your response matters so much. A boundary without action becomes only a request. And when someone sees that your limits are only statements without consequences, they may continue pushing further. The reason boundaries are so powerful is because they create clarity. They show where your responsibility ends and where someone else's behavior becomes unacceptable. If you tell someone that something hurts you but continue allowing the same behavior again and again, they learn that your boundary can be ignored. Over time, this can encourage more disrespect because they become confident that nothing will truly change. But when you respond with calm consistency, the message becomes different. You are showing that your standards are real. This does not mean becoming aggressive, threatening, or creating unnecessary drama. In fact, strong emotional reactions can sometimes give a narcissistic person exactly what they want because it creates attention, conflict, and another opportunity to shift the focus away from their behavior. Real power comes from staying composed and predictable. For example, if someone repeatedly speaks to you in a disrespectful way, you do not need to spend hours defending yourself or trying to convince them that their behavior is wrong. You can calmly end the conversation each time that line is crossed. Over time, your actions communicate a stronger message than your explanations ever could. The lesson is not created through arguments. It is created through consistency. Boundaries become meaningful when they are protected, not when they are repeatedly explained. A narcissistic person may not suddenly become emotionally aware or apologize because you set a limit, but they often begin to recognize that your access, attention, and presence are no longer available without respect. Your strength comes from showing that your boundaries are not just words. They are decisions you are willing to stand by. When dealing with narcissistic personalities, One of the most important lessons to understand is that too many explanations can create more opportunities for manipulation. Many people believe that if they can just explain their feelings clearly enough, give enough details, or help the other person see their perspective, they will finally be understood. In a healthy relationship, this approach can work because both people are usually interested in finding common ground. But with a narcissistic person, explanations can become something completely different. Instead of listening with the intention of understanding you, they may listen for weaknesses in your words. They may search for something they can challenge, question, twist, or use against you. The more information you provide, the more material they have to turn your boundary into another argument. Imagine you tell someone you cannot do something for them, and instead of simply accepting your answer, you begin explaining every reason behind your decision. You explain your schedule, your emotions, your circumstances, and why you feel the way you do. A narcissistic person may completely ignore the fact that you already made your decision and focus only on your explanation. Suddenly, the conversation changes. They start questioning your reasons, bringing up past situations, pointing out contradictions, or making you feel guilty for choosing yourself. What started as a simple boundary becomes a debate where you feel like you have to defend your right to make your own choice. This is how control can slowly enter the conversation. The more you try to prove yourself, the longer the discussion continues, and the more power they gain over the interaction. This is why clarity is often stronger than explanation. A clear statement does not create the same space for manipulation because it communicates your decision without turning it into a negotiation. Saying something like, "I'm not available, I've made my decision," or "that doesn't work for me," sends a direct message. You are not asking them to agree. You are simply communicating where you stand. Your boundary does not need to be presented like a case in court where you must provide evidence and convince someone that your feelings are valid. Your choices belong to you, and you do not need another person's approval before honoring them. Many people worry that being brief will make them appear cold, disrespectful, or uncaring. But there is a difference between being dismissive and being clear. Clarity is not cruelty. It is a form of self-respect. It means you trust yourself enough to communicate without constantly defending your position. When you stop over-explaining, you remove the openings that manipulation often depends on. The conversation becomes simpler because there are fewer points for someone to attack or distort. You keep your focus on your decision instead of getting pulled into endless arguments about whether your reasons are acceptable. The goal is not to make a narcissistic person understand everything you feel. The goal is to remain connected to your own confidence and remember that your boundaries do not require permission to exist. When we talk about narcissistic personalities, one of the most important concepts to understand is the difference between explaining and communicating. Explanation often comes from a place of wanting to be understood. It happens when you feel the need to prove your intentions, defend your choices, or convince someone that your feelings are valid. In normal, emotionally healthy interactions, this can create connection because both people are willing to listen and understand. But when you are dealing with someone who is focused on control, explanations can become an opening for more conflict instead of creating peace. The more you explain, the more details you provide, and those details can be questioned, criticized, or turned into a new argument. This is why learning the difference between healthy communication and over-explaining can completely change the way you handle difficult interactions. Manipulation often works by creating confusion. A person may shift the conversation away from the original issue and make you focus on defending yourself instead. Instead of discussing the disrespectful behavior, you suddenly find yourself explaining why you felt hurt. Instead of focusing on your decision, you are trying to prove that your decision makes sense. This creates a situation where the other person controls the direction of the conversation. They are no longer responding to your boundary. They are challenging your right to have that boundary. Recognizing this pattern is powerful because once you see it happening, you can stop participating in the cycle. You begin to understand that not every question deserves an answer, and not every accusation requires a defense. Clarity is different because it comes from inner certainty. When someone is clear, they are not trying to force another person to agree with them. They are simply expressing their position with confidence. A clear statement communicates that you have already made a decision and that you are comfortable standing behind it. This type of communication removes unnecessary emotional energy from the conversation. Instead of saying, I can't do this because I have been feeling overwhelmed, and last time when this happened, it caused problems, and I really hope you understand. Clarity allows you to say, I'm not able to do that. The difference is not just the number of words. The difference is the level of confidence behind them. Over-explaining is often connected to seeking validation. Many people develop the habit of explaining themselves because they fear being misunderstood, rejected, or seen as selfish. They believe that if they provide enough reasons, the other person will finally acknowledge their perspective. But with someone who is determined to challenge your reality, more information does not always create understanding. Sometimes it only creates more opportunities for disagreement. This is why emotional detachment becomes important. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means you stop allowing another person's reaction to determine whether your decision is valid. A boundary is not a punishment. It is a statement of what you will and will not accept in your life. When boundaries are communicated clearly, they create structure and protect your emotional well-being. The strongest boundaries are not the ones that are explained the most. They are the ones that are consistently followed. Someone may argue with your words, but it becomes much harder to argue with consistent actions. When your behavior matches your message, people learn that your limits are real. You no longer need to convince someone that you deserve respect because your actions already communicate that truth. This is why simple phrases can sometimes carry more power than long emotional conversations. Words like, I'm not comfortable with that. I won't continue this conversation if I'm being disrespected, or that is not something I'm willing to accept, create a clear line. They do not invite endless debate. They show self-awareness, confidence, and emotional control. The goal is not to win against someone who wants to argue. The goal is to protect your peace and stop giving unnecessary access to your emotions. When you stop explaining every choice and start standing firmly in your decisions, the entire dynamic begins to change. You move from trying to be understood to understanding yourself, and that is where your real power comes from. Another important concept to understand is the difference between seeking approval and maintaining self-respect. Many people who deal with narcissistic individuals fall into the habit of trying to make the other person happy, comfortable, or satisfied with every decision they make. They begin to believe that if they can just explain themselves better, stay calmer, or find the perfect words, the other person will finally treat them fairly. But this mindset can create a cycle where you constantly look outside yourself for permission to feel confident. A narcissistic person may take advantage of this because they recognize when someone is trying too hard to be accepted. The moment you stop needing their approval and start trusting your own judgment, the balance of power begins to shift. Self-respect means understanding that your choices do not become valid only after someone else agrees with them. Your feelings do not need to pass someone else's test before they matter. When you constantly seek validation from a person who enjoys controlling conversations, you give them influence over your emotional state. They can make you feel confident one moment and uncertain the next, simply by changing their reaction toward you. This is why emotional independence is so important. It allows you to remain grounded even when someone tries to criticize, guilt trip, or pressure you. You stop asking, how can I make them understand? And begin asking, am I honoring what I know is right for me? A narcissistic person may often use guilt as a way to regain control. They might suggest that your boundary is selfish, that you have changed, or that you are hurting them by choosing yourself. This can create confusion because you may naturally want to be a caring person who considers others' feelings. But there is a difference between being compassionate and allowing someone to use your compassion against you. Healthy relationships allow both people to have needs, opinions, and limits. Manipulative relationships often create a situation where one person's feelings become the priority while the other's feelings are ignored. Recognizing this difference helps you understand that protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel. Emotional control is another powerful tool when dealing with manipulation. A narcissistic person may look for emotional reactions because strong emotions can make you easier to influence. When you become angry, defensive, or desperate to prove your point, the conversation often moves away from the original issue. They may focus on your reaction instead of their behavior. Staying calm does not mean you agree with them. It means you are choosing not to give away control of your emotions. A calm response sends a message that you are no longer easily pulled into chaos. You are aware of what is happening, and you are choosing your response instead of simply reacting. This is why emotional detachment and clear communication work together. Emotional detachment allows you to observe the situation without immediately being consumed by it. Clear communication allows you to express your position without getting trapped in unnecessary arguments. Together, they create a stronger way of dealing with difficult personalities. You no longer feel the need to defend every choice, explain every emotion, or convince someone who has already decided not to understand. Your power comes from knowing who you are, what you accept, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. When you become secure in that understanding, manipulation loses much of its influence because it can no longer control your sense of self. One of the most important things to recognize when dealing with a narcissistic person is the power of emotional access. Many people believe that the only way someone can control them is through obvious actions like commands, threats, or direct pressure. But often, control happens through your emotional responses. A narcissistic person may not need to physically force you to do anything. They may simply create situations where you feel guilty, anxious, responsible for their emotions, or desperate to fix the tension between you. When you become emotionally invested in proving yourself to them, they gain more influence over your choices. This is why protecting your emotional energy becomes just as important as protecting your physical boundaries. Emotional access means allowing someone to have influence over your peace, confidence, and sense of stability. In a healthy relationship, emotional connection creates trust and understanding. Both people can express themselves openly while still respecting each other's individuality. But in an unhealthy dynamic, one person may use that emotional connection as a way to gain control. They may notice what triggers you, what makes you feel guilty, or what causes you to seek their approval. Over time, they learn which words or behaviors can pull you back into the same cycle. The more aware you become of this pattern, the easier it becomes to stop reacting automatically. This is where emotional regulation becomes a powerful skill. Emotional regulation is the ability to recognize what you are feeling without allowing that emotion to completely control your actions. It does not mean ignoring your feelings or pretending that something does not hurt. It means creating enough space between the emotion and your response so you can choose how you want to handle the situation. When a narcissistic person says something hurtful or tries to provoke you, emotional regulation allows you to pause and decide whether responding will actually help you or simply continue the cycle they created. Many people struggle with this because they have been trained to believe that every accusation needs an answer and every misunderstanding needs to be corrected immediately. But not every conversation deserves your energy. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to enter a conversation that only exists to drain you. A narcissistic person may want you to explain, defend, and prove yourself because that keeps you engaged. The moment you stop participating in that pattern, the dynamic changes. You are no longer playing a role where you constantly react to their behavior. You begin choosing your own actions based on your values instead of their demands. Another important idea is understanding the difference between responsibility and responsibility taking. You are responsible for your own words, actions, and choices. You are not responsible for managing another person's emotions, especially when they use those emotions to control you. A narcissistic person may try to make you believe that their anger, disappointment, or frustration is your fault because you did not do what they wanted. But every adult is responsible for how they handle their feelings. Caring about someone does not mean carrying the weight of their reactions. When you understand this, you begin to communicate from a place of strength rather than fear. You stop saying things because you are afraid of their reaction. You stop changing your decisions just to avoid conflict. Instead, you become comfortable with the idea that someone may not always like your boundaries, but their discomfort does not automatically mean you are wrong. True confidence comes from accepting that you can be a good person while still saying no, creating distance, and choosing what protects your well-being. The moment you stop allowing someone else's emotions to control your decisions, you take back a level of power they were never meant to have. Another powerful concept to understand is that narcissistic people often rely on emotional reactions because reactions give them information and influence. When someone becomes upset, starts defending themselves, or begins explaining excessively, a narcissistic person may see that as an opportunity to continue pushing. Your reaction shows them where your emotional pressure points are. It reveals what topics hurt you, what accusations make you uncomfortable, and what situations make you feel the need to prove yourself. This does not mean every narcissistic person is consciously planning every action, but many unhealthy patterns develop around gaining control, avoiding accountability, and maintaining a sense of power in relationships. Learning to respond instead of react changes the entire dynamic because you stop giving automatic access to your emotions. A reaction happens quickly and is often driven by intense emotions. It is the immediate response that comes before you have time to think. A response is different because it comes from awareness and choice. When you respond, you create a moment between what happened and how you decide to handle it. This small space can completely change your interactions with difficult people. Instead of immediately defending yourself when someone insults you, you can pause and recognize what is actually happening. Instead of rushing to prove your intentions, you can decide whether the conversation is even worth your energy. This shift from reacting to responding is one of the strongest signs of emotional maturity and personal growth. Narcissistic individuals may also use a communication pattern known as shifting the focus. This happens when the original issue is moved away from their behavior and redirected toward your reaction, your personality, or your mistakes. For example, you may bring up that someone spoke to you disrespectfully, but instead of addressing their tone, they respond by saying, "You are too sensitive," or that you always create problems. Suddenly, you are no longer discussing what happened. You are defending yourself against a completely different accusation. Recognizing this pattern helps you avoid getting trapped in conversations where the goal is not understanding, but distraction. Another important term is accountability. Accountability means accepting responsibility for your actions and being willing to acknowledge when your behavior has negatively affected someone else. Healthy relationships require accountability because mistakes are a natural part of human connection. People apologize, learn, and make adjustments. However, a person who constantly avoids accountability may instead blame others, create excuses, or make themselves the victim whenever their actions are questioned. This creates an unhealthy environment because problems never truly get resolved. Without accountability, the same patterns continue because there is no willingness to reflect or change. This is why staying focused on behavior rather than getting lost in emotional arguments is so important. If someone tries to make you feel guilty for bringing up a concern, return your attention to the original issue. Ask yourself, is this conversation actually solving the problem, or am I being pulled into defending myself? This question can help you recognize when the discussion has shifted away from resolution and toward control. You do not need to prove that you deserve respect. Respect is shown through actions, and your boundaries communicate what type of treatment you are willing to accept. Over time, developing this awareness changes how you approach relationships with difficult personalities. You become less focused on changing the other person and more focused on controlling your own choices. You understand that you cannot force someone to become self-aware, compassionate, or accountable, but you can decide how much access they have to your time, attention, and emotional energy. Real strength comes from recognizing that your peace does not depend on another person's behavior. It comes from your ability to remain connected to yourself even when someone else tries to pull you into confusion, guilt, or unnecessary conflict.